So, dear listeners, I wanted to do a quick preface of this episode before we got started because, well, of all the episodes we've done, this might be the one where the creator of what we're talking about is most likely to listen to this outside of, like, one of my interviews. The author of the Grimrose Girls, Laura Pohl, does in fact have a Tumblr that, as far as I'm aware, she is still active on. And of course, we do post all of our episodes on Tumblr. So I just want to preface this with, Miss Pohl, please note that none of what we say about this book is out of disrespect for you as a person or even as an author. I mean, listen, I've wanted to be a writer since I was a child and I still haven't finished anything. Meanwhile, you have gone and created a career for yourself, and that is indeed commendable. So on the off chance you happen to stumble upon this episode, please note this is a review and therefore not really aimed towards the author. This is strictly for readers to hear what we thought of it. Cool? Great. And since I'm already here, the following podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed therein are solely those of the speakers. And additionally, this podcast contains swearing and discussions of sexism, homophobia, racism, and basically every other kind of ism out there, as well as violence, suicide, murder, the whole shebang, so listener discretion is indeed advised. And now on with the show, and finally closing out our Pride Month selection. Kind of. We'll talk more about that later. Once upon a time, there were 4 young girls who went to a prestigious boarding school in Switzerland, who were the best of friends in spite of all their secrets. Alas, one day one of the girls died mysteriously, and her friends suspected foul play. And through their studies, they began to find parallels between their own lives and their friend's death with the fairy tales of old. Welcome to Niche Retelling. I am running through the public domain with a pack of wild lesbians to discuss all the ways old tales are made new.
Let's go! Let's go, lesbians! Let's go!
I am your host, Jasmine Garcia, and joining me today are...
I'm Sam Marchioni, and no, Laura Pohl, Kylo Ren is not a Disney prince. Finn is a Disney prince. Get the fuck out of here.
Hell yes!
I'm Ellie McConaughey, and I refuse, even though I'm the one inflicting so many sapphic media on all of our podcasts, I refuse to take credit for this one. I like interesting sapphic media.
Oh.
Hi, I'm River, and the straights are not fucking okay, but also no one's straight in this, and somehow that makes it so the queers aren't okay.
Boo!
And I'm Violet. This book stuffed me into a t-shirt cannon and launched me back in time to 2015 Tumblr, and I hate it here.
Oh man, not even pre-DashCon Tumblr! Ooh!
It's kind of weird period where we knew that everything, sucked on Tumblr. The same, we'd lost that shine, but everyone was still there, so we're all mad at each other all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the election happened, and we realized we had bigger problems. Ugh. Hey, dear listeners, I promise one day we'll talk about books positively on this podcast.
Yeah, we fucking won't.
I have so many books.
Percy Jackson! We talked about Percy Jackson positively.
The Priory of the
was
Orange
positive.
Tree. Get it on the list. Get it on the list. Priory of the Orange Tree. I'm putting it on there.
So it's the size of a brick.
Okay.
I have high hopes for the arc that I got from Simon & Schuster, but we'll talk more about that later. Dear listeners, continuing on our Pride Month celebrations, everyone decided that for our fairy tale of this month, we would be talking about The Grimrose Girls by Laura Pohl.
I'm not proud of this one. What are you talking about?
Yeah, y'all voted for this.
Listen, because the pitch of dark academia fairy tale retellings is not in and of itself a bad pitch.
No, it's an excellent pitch.
Its execution, hot garbage.
Listen, I survived the looming specter of Once Upon a Time. I'm a little trash panda in the Descendants can. I thought this would be my shit, okay? I wasted a Christmas present from my Nana on this book.
Oh.
Nobody is more disappointed in this than I am.
Once Upon a Time is a really interesting comparison point because, like, I think that ultimately the mechanical elements of trying to incorporate multiple fairy tales into a single story are always going to lead to a weird story. We'll get into it. I don't even know necessarily if I want to call it weird in the way that Once Upon a Time is.
This is basically trying to be Once Upon a Time by way of Pretty Little Liars.
But that's an insult to Once Upon a Time.
Does that mean it's a compliment to Pretty Little Liars?
I think it has a better control over its mystery than Pretty Little Liars did.
Damn.
Once Upon a Time at least has the dignity of really tight, like, say what you want about the familial tree again.
It's a good thing we don't have Thanksgiving in our land, because that dinner would suck.
But that is a interesting angle to take the idea of all of these characters interconnect and live in the same place. Turning a bunch of fairy tales into a familial telenovela soap opera is an interesting angle about why all of these fairy tale characters. Hot take, this book's curse should have just been Eldritch. It should have just been Eldritch.
Yeah.
It should have just been one of those things where either everyone in this book needed to be magic, or everyone in this book was a normal person before they started attending this school, and the school started warping their stories to fit the fairy tales they were being forced to retell, and the mystery then becomes, who am I, and what has this school done to me?
Yeah, the thing is, if you have popular culture existing in the world, and you don't acknowledge that it's fucking weird, again, Once Upon a Time, most of the best jokes come from Emma being like, I saw the movie, and then being disappointed or relieved that the fairy tale people she's encountering do not look like...
Is a perm good or bad?
Prince Disney movies existing, I'm like, so all of y'all are failing your insight checks? None of y'all have noticed, gee, isn't it weird that Yuki's this fucking pale and she has a stepmom named Reina Castillo?
So a book that I like referenced a couple times in the chat when we were talking about this book is a book that I quite like, which is Plain Bad Heroines, which is also set in a boarding school, kind of. Plain Bad Heroines has a lot going on. And it is also, in a lot of ways, about the fallout of history and pop culture and how those things continue to inflict themselves on the modern people. In particular, in Plain Bad Heroines' case, modern queer people. But what I think this book really... I mean, this book fails at a lot of stuff. I'll get into it. But I think what it really fails at the most heavily is it fails to make me feel any of it. I don't feel the crushing weight of fairy tales and cultural expectations and, you know, society on these girls. Mostly I just kind of felt bored.
Yeah, and that's really the biggest crime of all. This book is mostly boring. But anyway, I do have a format here.
We do have a format. Sorry, we have jumped off the fucking rails. Violet, this is just going to happen. You have to speak up. You have to yell at us to shut the fuck up sometimes.
Please do.
Saw in the server rules that we're meant not to talk over one another and interrupt, so I was letting y'all have the floor.
You gotta do it.
You gotta interrupt. If Ellie and I are on the same pod, you have to interrupt, because otherwise we will ride that train to Tangent Town, and all of a sudden we're talking about something completely different.
Amazing.
This is the accurate representation of queer, neurodivergent, raised/socialized/ now femme people. This!
Yes.
Not whatever the fuck Laura Pohl is doing.
So true.
Format.
Yes. So, yes, dear listeners, they basically stuffed all the fairy tales into this here book, and there's probably more to come in the second book, which I feel like I do still need to read at some point just so I can see what the fuck happens.
No, you can't pay us, and we'll consider it.
Look up what happened. It's not very interesting.
Boo. Figures.
I'm shocked. Shocked. This is my shocked face.
You don't even have your camera on.
Okay, so you know what? Again, if we talked about every fairy tale individually, we'd be here all day. So you know what? What is your connection to your favorite fairy tale that was referenced in this?
Like, I think they referenced Beauty and the Beast at one point. Am I wrong?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, yes, Nani is Belle. Nani's explicitly Belle.
Right, I forgot. Again, I'm going to remind you, the entire last third of this book is kind of a blur to me. I was forcing my way through it. I like Beauty and the Beast. That's my favorite I think it's a good setup for a plot. I like the Disney version, the animated version.
We'll get to that one day.
I like the French adaptation from the 50s. It's a good setup for a plot. And I also have some proclivities that make it appealing to me. Don't listen. Fucking say a word, River. You have your camera on. I can see you.
I have a theory that the reason there's been such a monster fucker boom is because we were all raised on Beauty and the Beast.
Belle is disappointed when Beast turns into a human.
I'm going to watch Shape of Water tonight. Bye.
Because that fish man can get it.
Oh, I ruined Sam. Okay, that's it. I'm done humiliating myself.
Yes,
River, you humiliate yourself.
Guillermo del Toro being a monster fucker is independent of Beauty and the Beast.
But it is a Beauty and the Beast adaptation, kind of.
It's Creature from the Black Lagoon meets Beauty and the Beast,
It is both.
Creature from the Black Lagoon was explicitly inspired by Beauty and the Beast, so therefore, yes, that and The Shape of Water count.
River, humiliate yourself. Go.
So, I guess, of the ones that were referenced, I guess Cinderella's my favorite, mostly because, you can do a lot with the Cinderella plot and still have it recognizably be Cinderella. All of those teeny bopper adaptations, I got complicated feelings about all of them, and I got, intricate, interlocking thoughts about all of them. Good or bad, I got thoughts about them.
You have a podcast where you discuss rom-coms, you say.
That too. But one of the things that I also find really interesting about most Cinderellas, and I think the thing that also is lacking about this, is that my barometric for Cinderella adaptation is I have to believe for a certain amount of time that the stepmother might win. It doesn't matter if it's only for a couple of scenes or a handful of minutes, but my barometric for is your Cinderella adaptation good is I have to believe that the stepmother is going to win. And you don't even get that in this.
Mm-mm.
The step family isn't in there enough, and what times they are in it, we'll get to it.
Yeah, we'll get to it. Sam, your turn.
Okay, technically I would say that when I was growing up, my favorite fairy tale was Beauty and the Beast, but Ellie already kind of covered that, and I want to just highlight it because it's a fairy tale I haven't heard as much about, The Goose Girl.
Damn right, it definitely deserves more love.
I found out about The Goose Girl 2 or 3 years ago because of this book series by Melanie Sellier, which was The Four Kingdoms, Beyond the Four Kingdoms, Return to the Four Kingdoms. It's very YA, almost Christian-y fairy tale retellings, but they go in some really interesting directions that make me not be totally averse to them. And so that was my first proper introduction to the Goose Girl, but then I encountered the book Thorn, which is absolutely amazing. The Dauntless Path series by Intisar Kanani, so fucking good. So fucking good. Such a good, interesting take on the Goose Girl. Cannot recommend it enough. And so when the Goose Girl showed up in this story, I was disappointed.
Join the club, and the Goose Girl has been in my life a lot longer than yours, since at least 6th grade. So I had even more build-up.
Disappointed but not surprised.
Violet,
your turn.
Yeah, so the problem here is that the fairy tales that the Grimrose Girls are riffing on are either riffing specifically on the Disney version of the fairy tale. So it's riffing on Beauty and the Beast as told by Disney, which is probably my favorite of the primary fairy tales referenced here, by which I mean it's my favorite Disney movie. Shout out to Howard Ashman and Alan Menken for their beautiful score and song.
Truly.
But the problem is that Nani, as our Beauty and the Beast stand-in, is specifically Disney Belle rather than a version of the fairy tale Beauty.
Way less likable.
And way less likable. And I think that's probably a lot of her unlikability comes from the fact that she comes into the narrative not as a friend to the other girls, is an interloper after the death of our Little Mermaid stand-in, Ariel.
Which, of all of the fairy tales to lean closer to their OG version, you're gonna go with Little Mermaid? All right, proceed.
Well, and it makes sense because, you know, the first time I read The Little Mermaid as a kid, it was brutal to realize, oh, no, she dies at the end. She becomes sea foam on the water, and the prince never returns her affections. And so that is an interesting story to riff on. The problem being that the Grimrose Girls is using that death, and then we're told, not shown, for the entire book, everything. And so our Ariel stand-in is just Ariel in terms of her red hair and collecting doodads and trinkets and everything. So it's a very surface level understanding of these fairy tales, and any fairy tale that doesn't have a Disney counterpart, we're just told straight up what they are when it's relevant to know what that is.
Well, and like, my favorite movie of all time is very famously a Little Mermaid adaptation. So, like, I think that movie more than any other, not the Disney movie, to be clear, audience. It's a Polish movie called The Lure, and it shows more than any other the metaphor of the Little Mermaid can be very handily adapted to a lot of things. In that case, there's a very clear undercurrent of queer and in particular trans allegory to the mechanic of the Little Mermaid story in the context of The Lure. And I feel like this book just sort of like name drops the Little Mermaid and tells you how it ends in the original Hans Christian Andersen story and then just never does anything with it.
And again, that's why I'm like, you know, when it says it wants to be once, again, at least once took some fucking swings. They're not always good swings. They don't always connect. But it took some fucking swing!
The thing that makes Once Upon a Time works is that it is a Disney story retelling Disney stories. Grimrose Girls doesn't have that connection to actually being like a Disney property, but it is still telling us a retelling of the Disney version of the stories, which, like, in the first chapter, we're introduced to Ella as our Cinderella stand-in, and her stepsisters are, I'm forgetting their exact names, but they're
It's Stacy. It's
Stacy and Scylla, so specifically riffing on the names that are given to the Disney stepsisters, and so
also one of them has the character development of one of the stepsisters from the sequel, where it's like
Anastasia. That's Stacy.
Yeah.
Not
but
really.
But there is that, like, if this book was going to theoretically, like, actually be interesting, that would have been the angle I suspected the author was going to play up in the next book-ish.
Stop trying to be ever after. You will never be ever after.
The point of view is entirely Disney-centric. And, you know, like Tumblr dark retellings of fairy tales and anything where it's like, oh, the original stories were so dark. And it feels like they missed the memo on the fact that a lot of what's considered the original stories were the Brothers Grimm going in and saying, how can we make this end in a really fucked up way and just kind of be the primary source for that weird ending.
Wouldn't it be fucked up if that happened? Anyway, I'm Jacob Grimm.
We're all referencing Once Upon a Time for reasons that I think are fairly obvious, but another thing that it really reminded me of, and I'm aware that this comparison is incredibly unfair to our writer here, deal with it, Laura, is Twin Peaks. The first season of Twin Peaks in particular is all about the emotional fallout of a popular person's death on this small community, and in particular, uncovering the mystery of her death and the emotional fallout of the secrets being revealed on the people who are left behind. Part of what makes that season of Twin Peaks work is like, and this was the stuff that actually started to get me into the story, started to like actually pull me in, and they very much leave it on the table, is there are characters who are fucking furious with Laura for like, you died, you left, and now we're all picking up the pieces and we're all discovering these horrible things about you, both done to and done by you. And it feels like you're here and you keep dying in front of us. Like, I think one of the characters even says that directly to her grave. And like, that's a really interesting emotional like complexity. I think it's Yuki has a really complicated relationship because she didn't actually get along with our Little Mermaid analog, and none of this gets really resolved or taken anywhere interesting.
Speaking of interesting, Jazz, what's your fairy tale connection to this?
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, this is not going to be a surprise to anybody if you've been here since the beginning. The Little Mermaid was my favorite growing up. I did, in fact, keep on waking up all of my parental figures to watch The Little Mermaid at like 3 a.m. when I was a little kid.
I love you, Jazz.
I love you too. And I also really love the lure. Thank you, Ellie, for being responsible for me learning about it. And thank you, Sam, for covering on 6 Degrees Star Wars.
Luring about it. Luring about the lure.
I lured them in.
Oh,
Perfect. 12 out of 10.
you fit right in, Violet. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also read Kissing the Witch as a teenager, which does have a queer Little Mermaid adaptation and kind of a backstory for the Sea Witch at the end, too. Like, there's a lot of really good Little Mermaid takes.
This ain't it.
Nope.
Unfortunately.
Another scale and unfortunately reveal about something about myself. At times while I was reading this, I was thinking I would rather be rereading the Katie Robert bullshit.
Ooh.
I don't know what that is.
Why would you want to do that to yourself?
Katie Robert does quote-unquote dark romance that is also very, 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 very thinly veiled dark Disney fic.
Yes.
That whole series is buck fucking wild and bad.
I tried to read the Little Mermaid one because I was kind of intrigued by the fact that it was basically Ariel Ursula, but I couldn't get past how blatantly she barely changed the names. It's just like, are you even trying to not get sued?
I have put more effort into naming characters in fan fiction.
Me too.
Like, we're all like talking about how it's a dark retelling of such and such a thing, and it's not actually, to be clear, audience, it's not actually that dark. This is actually the thing that kind of drove me insane reading it, because it sells itself as being extremely dark, and like, you know, I referenced the lure a minute ago. Multiple people's hearts are eaten on screen in that movie.
This is a middle grade book pretending to be YA.
And we're also like, we're talking about how it's just kind of boring. And one of the things that sort of struck me, I guess, about the point where it all starts to blur together is I can sit through bad movies all day, every day. I love bad movies, but this is such a huge time investment that like it feels much worse to have to sit and grind through 4 hours of whatever this was.
Yeah. And the tonal inconsistency with the book, like once we had more deaths happening and it was, you know, ooh, a twisted fairy tale version, like, oh, our Hansel and Gretel standing characters that have basically been background characters the entire time.
Barely background characters. I didn't even know she had a brother.
Yeah, they're given like almost a Saw trap or like a Danganronpa style like thematic death, all of which just feels tonally inconsistent with the sort of like boring slice of life stuff that we've seen beforehand. So once deaths actually start happening, it's just so over the top and it's happening to characters that we don't even care about. There aren't any stakes at that point. So it's putting the dark and the dark academia in the sense...
There's no light bulbs.
Exactly. There's no light bulbs, and it's academia because they're at a school, but that doesn't even really matter.
There are 6 characters who get introduced in a random classroom scene who I literally went like, all of these people are fucking dead. They're all gonna get fucking red shirted.
They're red shirts. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's
and here's the
bad.
Thing. A fairy tale slasher would fuck severely in the right hands. And that's kind of what I thought this was going to be.
I can't believe I'm fucking saying this, but wasn't there a Supernatural episode where there was like a succubus who kept disguising herself as Disney princesses or some shit?
Wouldn't surprise me.
There was one where a girl in a coma was acting out a bunch of different fairy tales to get her father to realize that her stepmother had poisoned her, a la Snow White, and because he was reading fairy tales at her bedside, she was murdering people in the fairy tale she heard last.
Right, no, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. The one I'm thinking of, it specifically involved strippers that had names like Ariel and Belle and Jasmine.
Maybe from the later seasons, but I didn't watch that.
What precisely is Supernatural?
Don't think about it.
I'm not explaining it now.
No, actually don't tell
Ellie.
me. The mystery is more enticing.
We got Ari, who is our Little Mermaid, who supposedly died by drowning herself. More on that later.
She is a MacGuffin.
She's a non-character, yeah.
She is in a fridge.
She is a sexy lamp.
Oh, very well spotted. We got Ella. Gee, I wonder who she is.
I wonder who the author's favorite is.
That too.
Why do you have to wonder? She says as much in her about the author.
I don't want to know shit about author.
And we got Yuki, who, at the very least, there's some effort put into trying to disguise her via name, but not by anything else. She's our Snow White, who is very buttoned up, has this weird pressure on herself to be perfect, and has complicated feelings about their dead friend.
The third worst coming out that I've seen this year.
First two. Don't answer.
I don't...
And then we got Rory, who is obviously our Sleeping Beauty, and...
a princess of a fictional European nation?
Yeah, which we don't find out until, 2/3 of the way in.
2/3, her, second to last chapter before the end of the book.
I did not even retain that, because by the time I got to that point of the book, I was just like, let it end, let it end, let it end.
Let it end, let it end.
Let it end!
I mean, I wish I'd been taking notes, because I feel like my notes would have gotten insane by the end of it.
Yeah, mine did.
I need to reference my own notes, because I only took a page of them, and at one point I wrote, was this thing with Ella and Freddie supposed to be a meet cute? And how long before I give up on taking notes? And then the very last note I took was, still don't get what's fully up with Penelope, but I kind of like Mick. Which I think was Michaela. I don't know.
Yeah,
that is where I gave up.
I did not like Michaela. I did not.
Fuck.
I did not like most of these characters.
I think I liked Michaela because she had personality.
I guess that's fair. And then Nani is the new kid in school, our very obvious Belle/Beauty, and also our one main Black and Hawaiian character.
Oh boy, is she.
She is also our plus-size representation, which, like all of the representation in this book, is handled so poorly. The bit that stands out to me is that they talk about her in her uniform and the idea that, her uniform doesn't fit properly because Grimrose Academy isn't used to plus-size bodies. And it's great, you're downplaying your beauty stand-in. At no point does it feel like the characters think that beauty is beautiful. They think that Nani is beautiful, which is a disappointment. There's so much of an emphasis on Yuki as the Snow White stand-in being extremely beautiful, the most beautiful person that anyone has ever seen, which because Yuki is, I feel like she's Japanese based on her name.
Yes.
Yeah. And so because she is Japanese, you get into uncomfortable Asian fetishizing territory, which is the problem with pretty much all of the representation in this book. We're shown, not told, and because there's so much of it, none of it is done with any real nuance, and you wind up with unfortunate implications.
And the thing is, we could have had something really cool here, because like you said, they never mentioned that Nani is beautiful. If they had just had that, she could have made a really nice statement, which is super important, especially considering the fact this is supposed to be a YA novel. This is meant to be read by teenage girls. It's hey, there is more than one way to be beautiful. You do not have to look a certain way for someone to see you as beautiful. It's the most basic thing you could do with a YA adaptation of Beauty and the Beast, and she couldn't even manage that. This Belle is plus-sized and Black and Hawaiian. If she had been able to find the time to stop fetishizing Yuki for a bit to point out, hey, Nani is also beautiful, we could have really had something here. But no, instead I'm just mad. As another mixed-race fat bookworm who has always loved this story, Laura Pohl, please, do better.
R.I.P. Pippa, you deserved better than lecturing Rory about her privilege.
Yep.
God, yeah. I don't know for sure because all Laura Pohl says is that Pippa has brown skin, but this may very well be the manic pixie light skin that Mouse Abolition on Talk has foretold.
That's where I was kind of going with my issue with Nani. So let's accept for a minute that Nani is our beauty stand-in. Skipping over the fact that she does not feel materially like a person who
exists in reality.
Yeah, who is a heavy-set Black Hawaiian woman in fucking Switzerland. Nani's love interest is, oh god, what is her name?
Svenja.
Svenja.
Okay. Which is, okay, Sapphic Beauty and the Beast. A+, 100% here. 10 out of 10.
In theory, yes.
Svenja is transgender.
And she's the only trans character.
She's the only trans character in the entire book. Now, we're going to go ahead and skip over for the moment the fact that I do not believe, as a trans woman, which is something I'm going to have to say a lot about Svenja, I do not believe that someone as transitioned at a close-knit, private, rich school in an isolated area without there being any societal friction. Like, I said this in the chat, I don't want her to only be transgender, but she has to feel like a person who has experienced transitioning in this circumstances. I refuse to believe that everything is as hunky-dory as the book pretends.
I'll say with Svenja, there's a little bit of friction. Like, at one point, she references the fact that she has her own room specifically because she's trans, and there were issues there. But, like, that's the least amount of grace I will give to Laura Pohl.
Okay, I will give that tiny amount of grace. But again, like, was that the school's policy? Was that a complaint from a roommate? Did she ask for that? Like, I want some information here. I want to know how she feels about it. She's a very flat character.
I think, like, the only real, like, you know, griff she has is, I think, like, she makes an offhanded remark about her mom and her sister being wishy-washy about it, and that, like, she knows where the records are kept because she burned her personal records that had her dead name on it.
Based of her.
Which,
that could have been cool. That could have been cool in a better story.
She could be such a cool character, and, like, maybe it's just my experience of modern trans girls. You know, I'm obviously in a lot of trans circles. I date a trans girl. I am friends with lots of trans girls.
You are a trans girl.
I am a trans girl. But, like, what strikes me about all of that is that, like, there's nothing there that feels like she is materially transgender, and that's before we get into the question, which I feel like some editor should have asked Laura along the way. So if Nani is Beauty, you're making the only trans girl in the story the Beast?
Yeah.
Yeah. I literally texted Jazz in a panic, standing at a bookstore while I was, like, cursorily reading this book on one of my many adventures into the outside world. I said, is she supposed to be the Beast? And then, like, my follow-up idea, because, like, the other thing that, like, Svenja gets a lot of, like, vibe energy about. One of her, like, vibe things that, like, Nani in her own internal monologue, because that's the other thing, is Nani is the only person who really interacts with her, is that Nani does not take to her because she's too open and too friendly and too flirtatious. And I'm like, okay, is she Gaston then? Which is even worse?
That would be weirder. And, like, I'm not going to say that you can't do a trans Beauty and the Beast allegory, but Laura, you are not Alison Greaves. You cannot write this carelessly. And again, the actual problem is that Svenja is just a non-character. She exists primarily to orbit Nani and, like, to be Nani.
She's her manic pixie dream girl.
Precisely. That is, we went to the same place. And that's such a fucking shame, because I feel like being trans in both a uptight private school setting, you know, my other partner is a trans man who went to an extremely uptight all-girls school in upstate Connecticut, and, like, the way he's described it for me is like the witch season of American Horror Story, but more lesbian.
Oh God, hell is so hot, Ryan Murphy.
Hell is so hot, Ryan Murphy.
The thing with Svenja is that I can almost understand why the implications of her being the Beast to Nani's Beauty is overlooked, because she is also trans Odette from Swan Lake.
Yes.
She's given a lot of ballet and swan imagery.
Plus Odelia, plus her name literally means swan.
She's also given, like, trans ugly duckling. Like, she talks about how she chose her name for, like, swan-related reasons. And so, like, she's playing a lot of roles within the story and in the fairy tale allegories. And so it just gets overlooked. And what's frustrating is that a lot of the characters outside of the main characters, there isn't an analog for every fairy tale character. And so someone is always having to do double duty. No one is perfectly mapping, like, one-to-one outside of the characters that Laura Pohl cares about.
This one random person at Grimrose is like, when's my algebra homework due, and why am I just having to deal with everybody's fairy tale drama.
Does that make Svenja this book's Rumpelstiltskin?
You're really fucking hurting me here, River. You're really...
I'm so glad I didn't make it this far.
Well, no, because she's only at 2 right now. She's currently only at the Beast and Odette.
No, she also has Ugly Duckling.
So she also needs to add the fairy godmother from Cinderella and the crocodile from Peter Pan.
What is happening in Once Upon a Time, Sam?
Good question.
Because again in August.
I don't know, they're all kind of fucking... Carl and Ellie from Up. I forgot. Rumpelstiltskin is Carl from Up.
Excuse me? Oh,
Season 7.
Season 7 got dumb. Maui's fishhook is a MacGuffin.
Sorry, what?
Season 7 got dumb.
From season 4 onward, it was vertical integration open season, man. Gender neutral. This came out in 2021. There was all the Once Upon a Time. There was no excuse.
There really isn't, no.
To get at that comparison is that by making one character play multiple roles and not thinking about the implication of all of those roles overlapping, whoopsie doodle, you did a war crime.
Again, I don't need it to be perfect. I referenced Plain Bad Heroines a little bit ago. Those characters are awful people for the most
I
part.
need it to be cleaner.
I needed to understand what's going on, and I need to feel like you understood what you were doing, making your only trans character the Beast analog.
Because you can do a lot with that. There's a lot of trans people that I know of that do find the story of Beauty and the Beast resonant.
Exactly. Like, you could absolutely do a story about, you know, you need the love to get out of your beast form. Oh, wait, your beast form is it's just you transitioning. Like, that's what that is. Like, that is the metaphor you could use, but I need you to actually think about it.
Also, again, to further muddy the metaphor, this is a beast who's already transformed, if that's the angle you want to go.
Well, here's the thing, like, the only reason that she has any beast vibes besides the fact that she is Nani's love interest is the fact she says, I'm sorry that you feel like you're a prisoner here, but you're not. That's literally the only real lip service we get to her being the beast, and it's just like, I guess I see where you're going with this. It's bad. Laura Pohl had a lot of ideas and didn't know what to do with them all, it feels like.
That is a bold statement. I don't know if
It's
she had...
generous.
She had a lot of characters that she wanted to do, but not a lot of ideas, which is why it winds up feeling so aimless for a lot of the story. I want to talk a little bit about, like, the rotating point of view.
So repetitive.
This is a story with 5 narrators. Ella, Yuki, Nani, Rory, 4. Ari haunts the narrative.
Yes.
But, so there are 4 narrators, and the point of view changes with each chapter. So the first 3 chapters, I think it goes Ella, Rory, Yuki. And then it goes Ella, and then Nani's introduced. And then it goes to either Yuki or Rory. So it's rotating every 3-ish chapters. The thing that I clocked early on and really bugged me is that in every 3 chapters, Ella always gets a chapter. And the other 3 girls are having to rotate who gets the remaining 2. So Ella is by far and large the most developed character because we spend the majority of the book in her head, and I think she even gets the last chapter. So
I believe she does.
It's clear that Laura Pohl has a favorite character in the Grimrose Girls, which it's very frustrating to me because it winds up that the other girls feel far less flashed out, and Ella is also like, she's white, or at least white passing, in a way where her ethnicity doesn't matter. They're told that she is biromantic and demisexual. And let me say, as someone who identifies as bi and demi, I don't claim her. And so she's
not affiliated with us.
Yes, and she's cisgendered. So, like, she's very much like the cis white girl with the straight boyfriend at Pride. And
I think Freddie is bi, or I think he mentioned something to the effect of, I don't care either way.
I admit, I don't care about Freddie.
No one does.
With Sam, in that the meet cute didn't work for me. Really, the only relationship that worked a little bit for me, and I know I'm in like the minority here is I did like Rory and Pippa, like micro and macro aggressions aside. The thing that I appreciated was that it did feel like a genuine slow burn. So
Rory was too much of a bitch to her for me, but I get it.
Rory was absolutely a bitch. But like, you know, the sort of tension of like meeting sword to sword, like there's something there that it doesn't work in this book because nothing works in this book.
Yeah, because I really should have liked it. I love a sword lesbian and I love a rivals to lovers, and yet here we are.
But I did appreciate it wasn't like love at first sight or anything. It felt a little more organic than the other relationships that we're developing.
Ship has good bones is what you're saying.
Exactly, yes.
Thanks a lot, Violet. Now I'm thinking about Tanthamore from Willow.
Oh, we don't have Missing Willow hours time scheduled here.
My literal first reaction, because I have it in chat, is I was like, okay, I'm going to start reading this book. And then I said, there are more people. I'm 5 chapters in and we're meeting a new POV. These chapters are already too fucking short to justify this many POV rotations. Either shrink the POV count and keep your chapters the same, or lengthen your chapters and keep the POV changes the same. You cannot have it both ways. Otherwise, I am dizzy trying to keep up who the fuck I give a shit about, and the answer is no one.
And here's the thing. Here's the really annoying thing about the POV chapters. For how much time we spend in each of these characters' heads, they still feel incredibly shallow for the most part.
Yeah.
They're kind of just constantly repeating their whole psychological thing over and over and over again. It's like, okay, at some point, I need to feel like these characters are actually characters beyond their dysfunction that you have assigned to them, Laura Pohl.
None of them have grown over the course of this book.
I know you feel like you're in the minority here, but I actually think that, like, of the romances in the book, I do think that Rory and Pippa I wouldn't say it's the one that I liked the best, because there's nothing that I really vibe with in this book, but, like, it is the one that I could most easily see being airlifted out of this book into a writer who could handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And they deserved a biracial writer.
Well, the author's biracial, but like way passing biracial.
She's like me. And I wouldn't necessarily trust myself to tackle the subject matter she's trying to tackle with Pippa and Rory here. Because while, again, I've said it numerous times, my father's Afro-Dominican, I do not look it. So no, I would not necessarily trust myself to write what it is to be a black woman in this private school. At least not without extensive research and sensitivity readers. Of course, you can write whatever you want, you just need to do it respectfully. Which is really our problem here.
The thing about Rory and Pippa is that it is the closest thing to functioning on any level, romance unfortunate standard. Again, the fact that Pippa and Rory have good enough bones. If you are one of those people who vibes with a rivals to lovers, academic sort of thing, until Pippa snaps at the end about the whole, like, lecture about class and race microaggressions or macroaggressions, you can, up until that point, if you temporarily, like me, forget that Pippa's black for some reason.
Because they don't bring it up.
I mean, no, they do bring it up in her introduction that she has brown skin.
Skin ambiguous enough that someone's going to get really mad about it on Twitter when the casting announcement comes out.
Well, yes, because we live in hell, Sam. We're all aware of this. Go on, River.
Until that microaggression argument happens, you can read their dynamic as standard rivals to lovers. The idea that Rory is not thinking about Pippa in that capacity, but is thinking about her as, like, someone she feels the need to best, which is, like, how most rivals to lovers start playing out, and that angle. That is why they are the ones that, like, have the most functioning and interesting enough to be like, okay, I understand why I give a shit about these two. Svenja needs to be fucking cooler to make that shit work, or Nani needs to be handled better, or whatever the fuck, and Freddie and Ella are the obligatory boring ones, and Yuki.
I actually really liked Ella and Freddie.
You are a slut for soft boys and girls who...
And the women who love them.
Yeah.
I'll also say that making your Sleeping Beauty analog a lesbian means that you're like 40% of the way to writing fan fiction of Aurora and Mulan from Once Upon a Time. So like,
God.
which when they wandered out of the show is the time that I checked out watching it, also because I broke up with the girl I was watching it with.
Oh, so that we'll get to that in August. I'm gonna cry.
See, I think the thing is that there's just not a lot of stakes with Freddie and Ella being together. Like, just as we have a problem with Svenja being Nani's manic pixie dream girl, Freddie is kind of Ella's manic pixie dream boy. And there is a place for that. Unfortunately, if there's not really a lot keeping them apart on a personality level, if all of the barriers are external, then they have to be some really fucking important barriers. And that kind of goes back to River's thing about, I don't feel like the stepmother can win.
Yeah.
The stepmother is not present enough in this book. Because, like, here's the thing. Technically speaking, if you wanted to go a dark Cinderella adaptation, again, this is not dark in, like, actual content material, but dark in that there are no light bulbs. The darkness needs to be that she actually needs to get hit on fucking page. Metaphorically.
Yeah.
There needs to be substance to that to make Ella's fear more tangible.
Or the emotional abuse needs to
not be written like an after-school special.
It's so, like, Ella's home life is so over-the-top wretched. The thing is that, like, it's implied rather than directly stated that their stepmother physically abuses Ella and also the other stepsisters. We're constantly told, like, Ella has, like, a thick face of makeup on, and then, like, halfway through the book, it just randomly drops, like, oh, well, she has to have that to cover things up, and it's like, that, like, hit me like a truck. Like, what are we talking about? Like, the book is so transparent with everything else. So the fact that, like,
it's so skittish about the one aspect that would, like, ground this, dark Cinderella is fucking absurd. Though this does mean that so far the only Cinderella that was brave enough to pull that off is the Not Another Cinderella story, which is bad. It's a bad movie. Don't watch it.
We're probably gonna eventually.
No, you really don't. It's not a strong enough case. It's like, it does the Cinderella story and then decides that the prince's parents are going to call CPS on the stepmother, and then she gets adopted by the prince's family. It's bad. It's bad and weird. It's bad and weird.
Well, it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure Ever After also had her getting abused on screen.
So CPS is actually where I was going with my comment, because, like, I think one of the reasons why it's so skittish about it, and this goes back to its claim that it's dark. If Ella is coming to school with either bruises or visible evidence that she is hiding bruises, that is fucking damning to her friends. That makes them complicit. The school complicit. It makes them awful people, or, like, at least cowardly people. And, like, I've been in that situation. I've had people ignore me coming to school with bruises. And, like, it's a shitty feeling. And, like, obviously these are teenagers, but it makes sense that the teenagers would be either helpless to do anything or too cowardly to act. But that's something that the book would have to deal with. Again, they would have to have an idea, and they would have to be willing to make the characters kind of shitty in a way that doesn't really, like, that can't really resolve cleanly, because they want Ella to be a main character and hang out with these people. This is the problem with the shifting point of view.
The thing is, she does try to make them kind of shitty people, but she doesn't go all the way with it. It doesn't feel like she's actually trying to do anything with them being kind of shitty. She just does it because, aren't teenage girls bitches? That's really how it comes off.
I honestly don't think that she intended them to be shitty. I'm gonna be real with you. I don't think she had the forethought to make them shitty. They're not shitty on purpose. They are shitty because this writer has biases and interactions and things that she has not thought through.
I mean, they apparently have enough of a bond to do the craft light bullshit that ends with Yuki getting Elsa powers.
Yeah, this book needed to either be completely magic in that this was a magical school and we were living in a fairy tale land and everyone needed to be magic, or the curse needed to be eldritch in that everyone was living in a normal society and they were starting to be twisted into the fairy tales and everyone had to go, where do I start and this facsimile begins? And the fact that Laura Pohl decides to go, no, all of a sudden magic is real in this world, bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, bullshit.
It's so sloppy. This is such a sloppily handled story.
This book is the strongest case for Jazz's on-running theory of teenagers do not have real friends. Because everyone in this book fucking hates each other, but in like specific different ways. Proximity is the sole thing keeping them together. Proximity and shared grief.
I was going to say that, like, if you're going to have it end in the big craft scene, go all the way. Have it do the end of the first part of It there. Have them do that. Don't actually have them do that. That was weird, Stephen King.
Yeah, that was weird, Stephen King.
Steven!
Speaking of weird child sexualities, should we talk about Yuki and the Arrow Ace problem?
We should talk about Yuki in general, but also that.
Go off.
Okay, all right. So one of the things that this author chooses to do is that when Ella starts hanging out with Freddie, Yuki starts growing this gnawing sense of being left behind. And she's already, like, withholding the idea that she thinks she's responsible for Ari's death because her and Ari got into this huge argument before she died. And so, you know, we don't know the contents of that argument, but, you know, Yuki is sort of spiraling behind her mask of, please nobody look through the curtains. Until Penelope, who fuck that character, fuck Penelope, she is so fucking annoying. She is, I think, the embodiment of this author's inability to be clever or write anything that is, like, decent.
Or at the very least, an inability to handle nuance.
But one of the conversations she has eventually has Yuki revealing that she's Arrow Ace, and I don't have the screenshot of the whole conversation, but suffice it to say, it's bad. It's a bad explanation about Yuki's whole deal. And again, like, Yuki has been, like, twisting and turning herself in knots about Ella because, like, Ella's, like, the one she is closest to out of the four of them. But, like, she always feels that, like, she's not Ella's best friend, you know? But, like, also they clearly are. But I'm, like, reading this and I'm like, all right, you've already established that some of these bitches be sapphic. Why isn't Yuki just having an unrequited sapphic crush and due to, like, social and societal and, like, maybe cultural repression is just not dealing with it and, like, doesn't know what to do about it?
Especially since we already established she has, like, this sense that she has to be perfect, which is not very well developed, to be honest. Like, we are told that she feels this way, but there's really no external factors that would make you feel like she feels that way. I mean, even Raina is pretty nice to her, if maybe a tiny bit distant.
She says that she's Ace, but we don't see her come to that conclusion. It is implied to be something she already knew.
Well, but, like, the other thing is that, like, the Ace thing... First of all, I understand that the Arrow-Ace dichotomy is two separate things. However, people who are not Ace and or not Arrow, stop conflating the two, for the love of Christ above.
I figured out in high school that I was Ace, but I knew that I still had, like, crushes and stuff, so that was when I started going down the wormhole of finding very specific words like autocorosexual or agosexual, and that was also how I learned about the split attraction model. So I absolutely can believe that at 17 or 16, Yuki has gotten to that point, because I had gotten to that point, partially thanks to Tumblr in 2014, 2013.
Currently there, thanks to my t-shirt canon. Quick, I will say, the author knows about, like, the split dichotomy because, like, Ella herself identifies as bi-romantic demisexual. So the author already knows that Arrow Ace are two separate things. Sorry, back to you, River.
Like, the thing about Yuki's description of being Arrow Ace is, A, it's fucking gross. I cannot put it into any other words that, like, when I read that paragraph, I screenshotted it and went, this is fucking gross. Number two.
And it's about the desexualization of Asian women.
That too.
Yep.
Number two, the idea that you built up all of this bullshit with Yuki, and I don't believe that comes from a place of Arrow isolation and, like, disillusionment with allosexuals, like, you know, alloromantics. I don't believe that Yuki turning herself into an island, sure, you can chop it up to, like, anger, grief that, you know, Ari spits at her that, like, you don't know what love is, which, like, both fucking shit! Love comes in many forms, not just romantic, platonic, and familial. Romance was good. The Greeks were kind of right on that.
And in fairness, the book at least doesn't come off as if it agrees with Ari there.
It doesn't agree with Ari, but Ari is also fucking dead and haunting the narrative. So, like, because she holds this place in the novel may not agree with her, but it is holding her on a pedestal. And that twists Yuki into such, like, a goddamn fucking nightmare that her chapters are insufferable to get to. She is the most guilty of the repeated psychological torment because, again, none of these bitches fucking talk to each other about anything, ever. Their third act friendship breakup fucking blows because they're all trying to sound way too emotional intelligent for what they actually are up until this point in the novel. And B, they're not fucking talking to each other. It's just predictable and bad. Anyway, I will get on a soapbox about Penelope later. Ellie, go.
Take your fucking therapy speak out of your book. That is my advice to all writers. That is just my usual, or unless you're going to make fun of it. But, like, the thought that I had, I was chatting about this book as I was reading it with a friend who it was going to be a published author pretty soon. I should see if I could get it on this pod.
Please do.
And we were chatting about, like, Svenja, and specifically how, like, there's a quote from Sisters of Dorley, which I go back to a lot, about how you write trans women that feel authentic. And the line that I use as an example is, like, this character says to another character, you guys really are just a bunch of trans women, aren't you? You go straight from hello to a horrible thing happened to me on the way to the gender this morning in 10 seconds flat. And, like, that is what makes a lot of the characters in Dorley, don't look up Dorley, it's a normal book, I promise, feel authentic. And, like, you said that, like, I agree with you, River, that, like, there's a moment where I was, like, kind of thinking, okay, so Yuki's got an unrequited sapphic crush, but it didn't click right. And it also doesn't, I don't click that she could kiss 100 boys in bars, but, like, know people who are ace who get pissed off at how allosexuals talk about and to them. And it didn't feel like that either. It felt like this very non-specific pain that didn't make her feel like a character. It made her feel like a prop for the author to slingshot non-specific psychic pain onto.
I'll say Yuki was probably the point of view character that I enjoyed the most, which is a low fucking bar. And I think that's because she was so at odds with the, like, dead saintly Ari narrative. She was angry with Ari before she died due to Ari being
a bitch.
Yeah, being
Absolutely.
a bitch about Yuki's Arrow Ace identity. She didn't believe that there was foul play, which put her at odds with Rory and Ella. It felt like she was at odds with the other girls in a way that I found interesting. I also liked the fact that she had a relatively good relationship with her stepmother. With Reina. And so, like, some of the pressure put on Yuki made sense from the fact that, like, Reina is the headmistress of this school, and the two of them, they're kind of emotionally distant and physically distant, but that also felt like Yuki herself is very emotionally distant and physically distant. So, like...
Which also goes into Asian stereotypes,
yeah, no, like, Yuki unfortunately feels like an Asian stereotype. I appreciated the idea that Reina, as the evil queen in Snow White, didn't feel like a caricature the way that Ella's stepmother did. And so it felt like we were kind of subverting the Snow White story with Yuki in a way that the other stories, the other fairy tales, don't get subverted. And like Ellie, I read a little bit about the sequel, and unfortunately, like, I think we wind up making Reina like the evil queen after all, and so she does wind up being evil, but I don't know. I hope I'm wrong, but I just felt like we were doing something with Yuki, even if a lot of it was falling flat and was horribly offensive for her various identities.
Yeah. The thing about Yuki and Reina's dynamic is, I don't know if it's specifically stated or implied. I know it's specifically stated that Dad is dead, but I also want to say that they are sort of in a situation where, not to cite Love Actually on Maine, but they're in the same sort of situation of, like, Liam Neeson and Thomas Brody Sandiger's character, where Reina was this new stepmother before Dad's death. So not only are they doing the Dad is dead, but they're also doing the, like, we are new to each other's existences. And I also think that, like, a lot of Yuki's pressure was paternal. And so she's implied, like, what do I do now that pressure, like, the ghost is still here? She has to learn to not be beholden to dead people, is basically Yuki's problem. She has to learn to stop being beholden to dead people. Anyway.
The thing is, that could have worked if we had seen a scene where her father put pressure on her in like a flashback or something, but we don't.
This book is allergic to flashbacks.
You're asking this book to show something, Jazz? You want it to show something when it could tell us something? Don't you want to be told?
You know, crazily enough, no, I do not.
This book is also kind of allergic to interrogating the relationships between fathers and daughters.
Yes.
Which, that is kind of a very fairy tale thing. It's almost always an evil stepmother as opposed to an evil father, unless you're reading something like Ulfer.
Or Donkey Skin. The Donkey Skin father is fucked up.
The girl with silver hands.
I don't know. I feel like it's also a detriment that the fathers are placed on such a pedestal. And that's something that especially I think is sinking it where it comes to Snow White stuff, because it's so easy to build up the dead sainted father and never interrogate anything about that. Like, that was actually something I kind of give Once Upon a Time credit for, was expressing how fucking uncomfortable it would be to get married to a man who is literally old enough to be your father, especially because in Once Upon a Time's case, he picked her because he wanted a new mother for Snow White.
Yeah, and I did a Snow White play in my senior year of high school, and I kind of interrogated the idea that her father was still depressed after the death of her biological mother, and it did unfortunately affect her and made her more likely to be a victim of her stepmother's evil plans. I'll get into it more if I ever actually rewrite that, because I know Sam was interested.
Kind of like plot of House of the Dragon in the way, which is relevant to a point I'm about to make. House of the Dragon has other stuff going on. The Yuki stuff actually really interested me because, for the first half of the book, she was actually the POV character I liked the most. Because, if we're talking about how they swap POVs, one of the books that does a lot of POV swaps is the Song of Ice and Fire series. They swap POV every chapter, and one of the things they do, I will actually give George R. R. Martin credit for this. They do a lot with asymmetrical knowledge, with things that the audience knows that the character doesn't necessarily know. Like, people have been arguing since book 4 came out over whether or not a character is actually the character in question that she says she is, because of a discrepancy in how Jamie's description describes her versus how Caitlyn's does. That is how much that book series does with asymmetrical knowledge, and Yuki's is the only one that is kind of going in that direction for most of it, because she's the only one who knows about the argument and she's not telling. But as I got deeper in the book, I got more and more frustrated with it because it wasn't doing anything with asymmetrical knowledge. It wasn't really using that to deepen the mystery or to give the audience all the pieces that they needed without handing this actual solution to the character. That's assuming that you're actually interested in solving the mystery. Having spoiled the second book, I know who did it, and it's real fucking dumb.
One of the things that I know I'm not enjoying, one of these cross-pollinated, multi-character things, is I start trying to solve it before the book tells me how to solve it. And I was never rewarded for trying to do that. And in fact, I was only punished because I was going to pretend that Laura Pohl had 2 degrees of creativity in her body. Just 2, not much, but I was going to try and give it to her. And so I was like, why is Penelope like that? I understand her function in the story. She's here to drive a wedge between our mains who really honestly don't need it. They are pretty much on the verge of a breakup at any given point in time. Why is she being such an overbearing bastard? Why is she trying to crack Yuki so hard? What is going on? Why is she here? Thinking that she was going to be a red herring, thinking that she was just a flashy thing to look at while the real mystery happened in the background. But no, she just ends up being the one who did it. And I want to kill God. Also, the way that Penelope was written fucking blows, because as soon as you get what her purpose is in the story, she is incredibly annoying to read, because she is so she is basically gripping Yuki by the shoulders and going, aren't you tired of being nice? Don't you want to go ape shit?
Yeah.
Which Yuki does deserve, actually.
Which Yuki deserves to go ape shit, sure, but they're teenage girls. They all kind of deserve to go ape shit. But, she never gets a different drum to beat when she realizes that that's not how she's going to get to Yuki. She never gets a different drum. She never tries a different angle. She is a snake character where she is never allowed to change strategies. She only has the blunt instrument, I'm going to clobber this wall down with a fucking hammer if it kills me. And spoiler alert, it fucking does!
Well, I have to advocate that I think that was a feature, not a bug. So, if you are unfamiliar with the fairy tale of the Goose Girl, IRTLDR. The premise is that a servant girl basically forces a princess to switch places with her and then proceeds to be the most horrid little shrew possible, including ordering the princess's magic horse to be beheaded. And, like, all this other shenanigans happen, but then at the end, like, the fake princess is such a bitch and so wrapped up in how clever she thinks she is that when she gets called before the king and queen, it's like, hey, what would you do to a criminal who did this super duper bad thing? And she's like, give them the terrible, terrible punishment. And they're like, great, you've passed your own sentence. So it absolutely makes sense to me that Penelope is this dense, is this cruel, is this stupid.
It makes sense with the fairy tale, but the thing is, this isn't the fairy tale. We have not been privy to the fact that the Goose Girl was even happening up until this point.
If you don't have that knowledge, she's just annoying to read.
I'll say I wasn't bothered by Penelope, and
me neither, really.
I'm not familiar with the Goose Girl, so it took the book literally saying, oh, like in the Goose Girl, for me to realize what was going on.
I mean, as someone who did know what the Goose Girl is, like I said, there was nothing that indicated to me that that's where they were going with Penelope, to be honest. Maybe if I were to reread it, God forbid, maybe I would have seen some more hints there, like a good twist, but I doubt it.
But I did think, like, when Penelope was introduced, and she's introduced as, like, a former friend of dead Ari, who reconnected with Ari, like, shortly before her death, I thought that she was a stand-in for the Sea Witch from The Little Mermaid. And so like,
true, yeah.
And so, like, that angle was kind of interesting to me. And then, again, like, putting Yuki at odds with the other girls was interesting. So I wasn't bothered by Penelope, but I was also reading, like, a different character on top of her, even after I realized, oh, well, we're being super on the nose with the naming. So she and Laura Pohl would have named this character some variation on Ursula if that was who she was meant to be. So I guess I'll see what's going on.
I was genuinely waiting for a Vanessa to show up, to be honest. The fact that she named Ari's ex Edric, but didn't name his current girlfriend Vanessa, wasted opportunity. If you're going to be this blatantly Disney-inspired, go all the way, Laura Pohl.
I think the other hiccup for me with that theory is, again, I was of the belief that our core four were going to be the only ones with, like, fairy tale connections, because, again, I was pretending this was going to be creative and that, like, there was going to be some sort of eldritch nonsense. So I wasn't really paying attention to anybody else because I was like, there, sure, whatever.
They had a blatant Goldilocks, River.
Yeah.
I don't care about minor characters because the author didn't care about minor characters.
An excellent point.
They're flash in the pans. Like, when Penelope stuck around, I'm like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to care about her. And then they never gave me a reason to. So I was like, well, now I just fucking hate that she exists.
Did anyone, sorry, changing the topic real quick, did anyone read this book physically?
No.
I did.
Audiobook.
Okay, how short are the physical chapters in person?
Let me pull up a random one.
I mean, considering the fact that when I read it digitally, because what I usually do is I'll switch between either digital or physical, and then switch to audio when I'm doing things that require me to be using my eyes and hands.
Chapter 23 starts on page 147, goes up to 155.
Way longer than I expected. Wow.
Well, the type's kind of big.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was going to say, they were short on my digital copy, so I would have thought they'd be even shorter on the physical.
Yes, exactly, which was what I was getting at, because I read it digitally. So I'm glad that it was at least a couple of pages as opposed to, like, 3 pages for each chapter, which is what I thought it had to have been physically. So thank you for indulging me,
that is longer than some fanfiction chapters that I've put up.
Sure, but that's fanfic, and fanfic is being done for fun.
But also, like, so physical chapter length is not really a requirement that I hold to super tightly.
Yeah,
a lot of my favorite books, like, John Dies at the End has a chapter that is one sentence long. Like, that's it. Oh, is it really wrong on sentence? No, it's just a single.
Well, yeah, it's possible to do that effectively. Stephen King's It also had a chapter that was one sentence.
But, like, I read this book predominantly on my Kindle app on my phone, mostly on the subway rides to and from work in the morning. So I could usually, like, get through a chapter or two on the subway, which is about, I guess, 15, 20 minutes on the subway. And I think that chapter length is actually kind of a problem because, like, you know, every time you switch POVs, you have to reorient yourself in time and space and then do whatever the character's doing. So there's never really enough time for any of the POV chapters to get any momentum. They're really just doing, like, they show up, they have one emotion, they do one action, next person. Show up, do one emotion, do one action, next person.
I think that's one of the problems that a lot of authors will run into when they're doing multiple POV, where they don't allow time to pass before they've completed their cycle. So each point of view character is kind of telling the same point in time. And it did feel like with the Grimrose Girls specifically, the other POVs, we were almost kind of rushing to get back to Ella. Like, the character, it's shorter chapters and the characters weren't really allowed to do meaningful stuff outside of what was happening around or with Ella.
Honestly, Laura Pohl, just make the story about Ella. It's clearly the character you care the most about. If Nani and Svenja's romance was viewed predominantly through a third person who barely interacts with either of them, it can be a lot more interesting that way. I do know several books that I like quite a lot that will just, like, you know, okay, that couple over there, they're having their big romantic reunion, but I don't actually give a shit because I have to go over here and do something. You know, that stuff is fine, and that works a lot better. And you could have Ella be a more complicated character and honestly have the other characters feel more complicated. Like, yeah, Yuki and Nani and Rory all have one emotion. But, like, if you only see them through Ella's eyes, you can feel like, well, maybe they have other emotions that I'm just not seeing.
Because Ella clearly loves them very much.
Yeah, Ella is the only one who is, like, trying to make an effort of getting everyone unified, which is why we keep racing to the Ella chapters, because she's the only one who's, like, gaveling in the group meetings, being like...
pushing the plot, yes.
She's the only one that is allowed to be soft or sweet, is allowed to feel kind. I feel like we keep ignoring Rory, and that's because the book ignores Rory. Like, she's a lesbian with chronic pain who likes swords, and then she's also secretly a princess of a European country
that does not exist.
Yes, which isn't.
I look forward to them going to war with Genovia. Genovia will win.
What are the countries from the Princess Bride? Like
Florin and Gilder.
Florin and Gilder, yes. Yeah. They're in a trade alliance with Florin and Gilder. But like,
I'm sorry, there's just one line I really need to quote very quickly. You can't. He's French. It's okay to be French in fiction, but not IRL.
Yeah, no, so I have it here. It's like half French, so I should know. It's okay to be French in, like, fiction, but not in real life. I know you're a sucker for redemption arcs, Ella, but this is going too far. Yeah, Rory is the only character who is allowed to occasionally be funny, including the, like, I'm gonna go talk to Edric. You're just gonna punch him in the face. It's a Batman interrogation.
What's the name of the fictional country she's a princess of? I'm going to have to do a thing.
We're not given a name.
No.
Okay, I'm just going to have to use Switzerland then, you know. It's like the fella says, in Genovia for 30 years under the Borgias, they had warfare, terror, murder, and bloodshed, but they produced Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had brotherly love. They had democracy for 500 years. What did that produce? The Cuckoo Clock and this shitty book.
Man. Yeah. Rory was kind of exhausting to spend time with for, like, most of this book. And another thing that really bugs me about this book is how there are clearly all of these compounding problems with all of these characters. And then suddenly, by just in time for the ball at the end, they are a united front. They are starting to actually be somewhat emotionally intelligent with each other. It's just like, you did not earn this book.
You did not earn this.
No, but we gotta get dressed up in our pretty costumes that Ella made just perfect for us, because Ella's the sweet cinnamon roll who can do no wrong, and she knew exactly what Rory wanted, and it was a pantsuit.
Rory, I hate to break it to you, baby girl, but you're not gonna be a girl for much longer.
Yeah, no.
I diagnose you with NB.
I really wanted to like Rory, not just because, I have a
Thing about sword lesbians, Ellie.
sword lesbian, butch lesbians. If you meet either of those, both of those conditions, I'm free on Thursday. Would you like to go out on Thursday when I'm free?
Maybe not in this case because teenage girl, but yes, I get you.
But, she's just, and I guess that there's, if I wanted to do the legwork for the book, I could connect her sexuality and her chronic pain to her being kind of unpleasant, those things making her prickly. But no, book, I'm not doing that legwork for you.
Because the thing is, the book doesn't do it well. Yeah. I have a friend with chronic pain who tends to be prickly, and I can tell you right now, Rory feels like an insult to them.
I think the only thing about Rory that, I sort of empathized with is, A, I was a very angry 16-year-old, but B, I think the other thing about Rory that is sort of the hiccup is the poor translation of the Sleeping Beauty idea, where, I suspect that, if we're pretending the Disney Sleeping Beauty is what we're running off of, if her constant moving of schools and locations is her way of outrunning the curse or whatever, or her way of being, the equivalent of hiding her in the woods with some fairies, then I can understand how a writer would go from A to B of okay, but how would that emotionally affect a teenage girl? And go, okay, that would probably make her rough to connections and what connection she does have she holds sacred, and would make her, sort of a jackass to be around because she knows that, there are no consequences for her because she's also raised in immense privilege. But, this is speculation. This is all shit I am pulling out of my ass. The book doesn't have anything in this.
To make my reference back to Plain Bad Heroines, that is another book with a shifting POV, and there are several moments where a queer woman, especially, is a huge piece of shit to someone else. And, then they cut back to her POV, and she's like, fuck, why did I do that? What was going through my head that I made that decision, that I was that prickly in that moment? And then she just fucking does it again because she can't stop herself. That's interesting. That's something.
Yeah. It feels like the characters in this book are unlikable through a lack of author skill as opposed to a deliberate choice. Rory in particular, I did find grating because she has all of the Tumblr funny, fanfic funny lines. And so it doesn't land. It didn't land for me. Going back to the ball, which was brought up, the thing that it bugs me that we spend all this time building up the ball and Ella's sewing everyone's costume, and we don't even have the decency to have the stepsisters destroying Ella's dress beat that we get in Cinderella. She's able to sneak out of the house no problem. And that's the thing, going back to, it never feels like the stepmother is actually going to win. There's no consequences for Ella getting to go live out her princess fantasy beyond, she gets held at knife point by Penelope later on. But, the actual Cinderella beat that I thought we were building to doesn't actually happen, because then that would mean that she doesn't get to wear her beautiful dress, which is clearly just the dress from live action Cinderella.
The beat isn't built to, but it's also not meaningfully subverted.
Yes.
And not a single chopped foot in sight. And I had just watched The Ugly Stepsister, which came out a couple of months ago when I read this book, so I was immediately disappointed. I would have much rather be watching The Ugly Stepsister again. Editor Jasmine here. So in the midst of my research, it does look like Ella gets half starved and beaten in book 2. So I guess that's how we make up for the fact she got her pretty fairy tale moment in the ball.
God, I'd rather be doing anything else than read this godforsaken book, but here we are.
So I brought this up in our group chat, but I think there's a little more to it than I realized. I assessed that I think Ella is kind of not like other girls, because if Rory is very much in that Tumblr brand of not like other girls because she's into fandom and she's a lesbian and she's fun.
I don't think Rory has any other interests other than fencing. Fencing is her hyperfixation, and you can try to convince me otherwise.
She makes a lot of pop culture references, though.
Yeah, but you can make pop culture references without being a fan of the pop culture that you watch.
True.
But I remember being fucking a high schooler, and again, the approximate knowledge of many things and pop cultural osmosis is a hell of a fucking drug.
Okay, so the point I'm trying to make, though, Ella, in juxtaposition to Rory, Ella, I think it's an interesting thing to try and do to, like, bring back that sort of synthesis of it's okay to like things that have been associated traditionally with the feminine and that they have their place. They are useful in the narrative. The problem I have is that Ella, I feel, wavers across that line, just going straight back into, like, embrace traditional femininity. I have the coquette aesthetic and the princess nails, and this is my girl dinner. And, like...
No, I can't see Ella doing girl dinner.
And, like, I made a quip that she is one really good date and a broken condom away from being a trad wife.
That's mean, but true.
I do think part of it does come from the fact that, like, Ella is having to literally keep house. It's just so over the top with the chores she's having to do around the house. The idea that she's the only girl in the bunch that lives at home, so that way we can have the stepmother and stepsister dynamic, and none of the other girls get to come over because they don't get to see how bad her life is. The details that are added for these characters, it brings me back to, like, forum roleplay Disney spirit sort of stuff, like very much Once Upon a Time before Once Upon a Time, where it was here's my character that is inspired by Cinderella or is actually Cinderella, right down to the fact that the names are so on the nose, like the details are twisted just enough. Like, I would not be surprised if Laura Pohl, like, had, like, a G-Sync era.
Editor Jasmine here, and you know the crazy thing that occurred to me while I was editing this? It is so fucking easy to recreate the dynamic of Cinderella being overworked without invoking all of the obvious abuse stuff. And in fact, many a modernization of Cinderella has figured this out. Make her a service worker. That would be such an easier and much more believable way to create the Cinderella dynamic without having to raise all of these questions of why the fuck has no one in her friend group noticed how bad it's gotten. A Hilary Duff movie from 2005 figured this out, Laura Pohl.
The bitch is on Tumblr, so, you know.
She is on Tumblr.
I'm actually a little scared she's gonna find this.
That would be fucking hilarious. Get in the comments, we need the engagement. But no, this book does have a Tumblr tag, which is a disappointing thing. But the other thing is that, like, again, in the Tell Don't Show department, allegedly, Ella has OCD.
I mean, I would say it's a lot more than allegedly. It just happens to be very cliche.
I feel like Ella's OCD would make her being a housekeeper a fucking pain. And, like, if any place there should be a reference to her OCD worsening her life, it should be the fact that she is expected to be a housekeeper.
And it was just portrayed in such a cliche fashion, I half expected the Monk theme song to start playing.
It would be one thing if there was a reference to the idea that, like, oh, like, it was so bad to the point where the stepmother or, like, dad before he died got her on medication. And so she's on enough medication that she'll still have bad days, but it's like it's not actively crippling anymore. But there just isn't.
I don't remember when I grokked exactly that she has explicit OCD. I think it's referenced very early, because I remember thinking, oh, so, like, in this metaphor, is the thing forcing her to do housework her own OCD rather than her literal stepmother? Because that would be something. I don't know if you would do that in a way that would be inoffensive. I'm not even certain I want it done in a way that's inoffensive. Be offensive sometimes.
Or even just have the stepmother take advantage of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, have her putting stimuli in Ella's path to make it harder for her to live.
You know, the funny thing is, Kissing the Witch, the book by Emma O'Donoghue I keep on bringing up, had a Cinderella story in which Cinderella was OCD. Like, it wasn't said explicitly because it was still a fairy tale setting, but it was very clear that's what it was. And yeah, it went with the route that Ellie said, and where, you know, it wasn't a stepmother or stepsisters forcing her to work. She just felt like she had to because of, as it was put in the book, again, debatable how offensive it was or not, the voices in her head telling her she had to. And at the very least, again, that is interesting. And it really just goes to show that this book that is trying so hard to be edgy and this isn't your grandma's fairy tales, I'm sorry, this has all been done before and better.
This is actually my ultimate, I think you can probably end my participation in this episode right here. My ultimate advice to this, Laura, if you are listening to this, do something. Do something. Cut the therapy speak and do something with your story. Oh, well, that might offend someone? Fuck it. Do it. Do something. Write a character.
This book needs to stop being afraid of me.
Yeah, some of my favorite books of all time have fucking traumatized me. Do something.
The cruel irony is she was clearly trying so hard to tick every box that would make the Tumblr arenas like this book. But the problem is she doesn't actually really do anything with it, that she still made us mad at this book.
Unless you're books that I'm not going to say the names of because their existence is offensive to me, I will be infinitely madder at you as an author if you are so afraid of offending me that you don't do anything than if you actually do something to offend. I will take someone clumsily trying to write a trans character who is brittle and angry and has trouble engaging with the rest of her uptight private school because it's been weird transitioning, then I will a trans character who does not exist beyond the surface.
You can't write for the Twitter user in your head. You can't write as if you are afraid of the call-out post you're going to get.
Brock, is this true?
Oh, ouch, ouch.
And I think the other thing, again, about books that, ultimately, upset me, say what you want about the Nominee series by Lindsay Ellis, but, the second book is a fantastic book, but it is not a healthy book, and I thought I heeded those trigger warnings as effectively as I could have, and it still bodied me in my kitchen so much that I had to put it down for a couple of days and walk away. But I'm still gonna recommend it to everyone I fucking know.
People like books that make them feel something. Who would have guessed?
The Lost Tomb series gets occasionally full-on traumatic to read. I have a little collection of people being absolutely furious with me from the end of the first book, and I'm still hey, you should read The Lost Tomb. You'll never recover from it. It's going to destroy your brain. Go ahead, Sam.
There's a reason that with half the movies Ellie ends up recommending, the end result is one of us going, Ellie, what the fuck?
Ellie, what the fuck?
The Atlas 6, I understand everyone who loves that series and I understand everyone who hates that series, but that series is the embodiment of pick your favorite fucking war criminal. None of these people are good. They're all just sliding scales of awful.
Hell yeah.
That's okay to do, because it's fiction.
Hope you get your family out of Star Wars.
It's the lack of skill, it's the lack of nuance that really bugs me about this book.
Yeah.
I think this concept could work if it was handled more skillfully, if we were being shown things rather than told things. I do think that there is something there in terms of having to subvert a fairy tale cycle. Deaths inspired by the darker retellings of fairy tales. But
absolutely.
It's so beholden to the Disney point of view, and so beholden to a surface level reading of these characters, not just in the fairy tales, but the characters in the book that it doesn't feel like anything is truly happening. It feels like Laura Pohl had this concept and then didn't know where to go with it. And that's why the book winds up feeling so aimless.
A book this long should not be so shallow.
Exactly. And something that really bugs me, in the discussion that we had about the book before doing the podcast, is the fact that there are all these characters from diverse backgrounds, diverse identities, and it feels because it's done so shallowly, it feels like forced diversity, which is a term I hate and isn't actually true. But in these kind of situations, it's okay, I kind of get why people might be annoyed about it, but that's just because none of these people feel real. None of these characters feel like real characters.
Laura Pohl, you cannot just read Tumblr posts and call it done. You need to do actual research, and you need to actually talk to people from these demographics.
Shout out to Writing with Color.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Make that character a human person.
Yeah. And the Disneyness and the Eurocentricness of it all really comes to a forefront when you do have characters of other ethnicities. I would have loved for Yuki to represent a Japanese fairy tale as opposed to representing Snow White. Having like,
make her the Yuki Onna.
Yeah, it feels like a missed opportunity to explore fairy tales from other cultures. I remember doing a project back in school where we explored sort of the Cinderella myth and like the Cinderella stories that spring up in various cultures. And so the idea that like these stories were kind of being told and developed along the same time across the world is super exciting. And
absolutely. We did an episode on some of those and it was a lot of fun. And it's one of the reasons I made this podcast, because seeing all of the different ways that different people across different cultures and different times tackle these stories is really fucking neat.
There's just so many missed opportunities is the thing that really bugs me about this book.
Also, pacing of this book, fucking whack.
It starts so slow, and then finally it's at a breakneck pace, but we don't really get a chance to really address all the emotional beats that you poorly set up.
That's why I think that these stories kind of endure. Yes, I am seamlessly transitioning into the final part of the format. You know, they kind of actually almost bring it up that, like, man, I'm gonna wind up with another Plain Bad Heroines connection. Fuck. That, like, these stories existed as a form of societal control and, you know, specifically of women. And, like, if they had gone that way, if they had gone the Plain Bad Heroines way of that being the way that these stories are manifesting as either a literal or metaphorical example of patriarchal control of these girls, that would be almost something that would be kind of Cabins in the Woodsy, metatextual. You know, in a way, I think that they endure because they have to have endured. Because if they are still being told 400, 500, I actually don't know when the Brothers Grimm are from, years after them guys kicked the bucket, there must be something about them that speaks to people. The journey into the West doesn't last that long because people don't vibe with it.
The curse should have been fucking eldritch. Should have been fucking eldritch.
Should have been fucking eldritch. Do something, Laura. Do something.
Make it Cthulhu. The curse is actually the Cthulhu they have hiding in the basement.
We can't muddy the waters further by bringing H.P. Lovecraft into this shit.
Oh my god.
That's not a million miles from what the reveal is in Plain Bad Heroines, speaking of which.
Love that.
A lot happening in that book.
Anyway, the reason they endure, because Disney got their grubby little fingers on them, and they're gonna milk that shit till the heat death of the fucking universe, and even then we will have traveled to other galaxies, and there will be a fucking space Disney world where it's just an entire world that's Disney.
They're whalers on the moon.
I don't give Disney credit for that at all. I'm the only thing I'm willing.
It's giving them too much credit, yeah.
They were picked up by Disney because they had endured, and even if they hadn't, Disney's intervention is no guarantee that the story will endure. Disney has done an adaptation of the Uncle Remus stories, and aside from like one Ralph Bakshi adaptation that is admittedly an extremely good movie, do you ever see the Uncle Remus stories in movies anymore? Are they doing a Polish adaptation of the Uncle Remus stories? No.
Probably for the best.
I think that there is something about these stories that was there that spoke to people before Disney got their grubby little mitts on it. And that's not just because I'm unwilling to give Disney credit for... I should give Disney more credit. They employ me.
I mean, these stories endure because we were told these stories as children. And our parents were told these stories as children. And their parents were told these stories as children. And it's just one long game of telephone.
I mean, look, I guess my point is that, like, yeah, our parents were told these as children, and they told us, but why these stories and not other stories? You know, I got told a bunch of Native Alaskan myths also as a kid, and, you know, why are those the stories that endure? I think that's what makes this podcast interesting, asking ourselves, why did my mother decide to sit me down with Beauty and the Beast instead of fucking an adaptation of Journey into the West? I guess Dragon Ball. I don't know too many adaptations of Journey into the West. What is it about them?
Stories endure, like, because of, you know, the oral tradition. And I think the fact that there are so many different retellings and different versions that, like, have spread up across the world is part of the reason why we continue to read and tell and study them, because there are so many variations and stories that, like, kind of fill the same archetype. I disagree with what the Grimrose Girls tries to say about the fairy tales persisting, which the Grimrose Girls take is that these fairy tales persist because they told women a particular way to act or they would face particular consequences. I don't like, that's a very shallow Tumblr reading of fairy tales. I think it's more about like human connection and like finding patterns in one's life through more fantastical circumstances.
Yeah, like as Ellie pointed out, that is kind of the whole thing of this podcast. Is part of why I do this is because, again, there is a reason these stories are told in so many different ways, in so many different cultures, and by so many different points of view. And it's because it's a way to kind of connect all these people who see something here. And no one person is going to see these stories in the same way. They're going to take different things from it. And I just think that's neat. And I'm just sad that the potential of using the dark academia setting and possibly doing like a fantastical slasher out of these fairy tales was kind of squandered here.
Fuck it, it's ours now. We can do whatever the fuck we want with it.
I'll write a gay fairy tale for you. You want a gay fairy tale? I'll have your desk on your desk by the end of the week.
Oh, please, I got a bunch of gay fairy tales in the works.
I'm not going to tell you what's in these notebooks, just know it's been cooking in my brain since 2017.
Oh, hell yeah.
The Grimrose gays.
I gotta go write that novel. Anyway.
Final thoughts?
You did it, Laura Pohl. You made me think Once Upon a Time was better.
You did it, Laura Pohl! You made me think that Descendants was better, because at least Descendants had the decency to be fun with it.
You did it, Laura Pohl. You got me a perfect example that I can point to when any of these people are like, Ellie just likes it because it has lesbians in it. It's not actually enough.
Violet?
My final thought is I misremembered the author's name is Lauren Pohl, so my apologies to Laura Pohl for misremembering your name for the duration of this podcast.
I just flip-flop between both of them, man.
Oh, boy. Laura Pohl, please don't be mad at us.
Be mad at me. Come yell at me. I do not give a fuck.
If you're so mad at us that you're going to start beefing on Tumblr with us, first of all, gross. Second of all, learn to take criticism then, I guess.
But thanks for the engagement, I guess, if you end up doing this.
True.
But listen, we're not saying this out of anything personal. It's just that these stories, shock of all shocks to the person who runs this fucking podcast, matter to me. And I think we could do better with them.
You and I, Jazz, were on an episode of my podcast where we were very upset with the piece of media.
And that would be the California Suite episode of The Biggest Night in Podcasting, by the way.
I don't think we were any meaner to this book than we were to, like, California Suite. If I don't like it, I'm going to be honest about it. And why?
Of course. I just know that when authors are on social media, shit gets weird.
Start a war over fake Goodreads reviews or something?
This ends the sentence.
It's pluggables.
As referenced a minute ago, I have a podcast called The Biggest Night in Podcasting, where we talk about Oscar-winning movies for reasons that made sense to me at the time. All of these lovely people, except for Violet, if she wants to be in the future, have been on my episodes, very recent episodes, actually, and we've got some good stuff coming out for you. We've got Fame, we've got Sense and Sensibility. Come check it out. And you can find me on Tumblr for my sins at Football and Tuxedos, and on Blue Sky, Letterboxd, and Medium at LSR42.
I am the host of 6 Degrees of Star Wars, the podcast where we explore all the ways George Lucas's flagship franchise surrounds us, binds us, and penetrates us in the landscape of cinema. And I guess also books, because we didn't really talk about it, but Ella is mentioned to be a Star Wars fan in this. Like, good for...
Her dad's a fan of the expanded universe, which doesn't count anymore. So...
Are they still making money off it?
They can, but like also my official stance on the expanded universe is so long as it's not directly overwritten, it's still canon.
Anyway, please check out 6 Degrees of Star Wars wherever pods are cast, and also find me on the socials at Demisem. That's DEMISEMME.
You can find me on Blue Sky at Dreams Rebel and on Letterboxd at punk_skeleton. I am also the host of The Straights Aren't All Right, a podcast where I gather a bunch of queers together, make them watch straight rom-coms, and try to answer the question, are the straights like okay? Everyone on this pod except for Violet has been on an episode, and I have a very small back catalog, so it's a quick listen. My next episode may or may not be out by the time this episode goes up. We will see how fast I can edit.
Yeah, you can find my single skeet on Blue Sky at Momentary Horrors. Maybe you'll see me on future podcasts as I start making my way around this sort of family.
Join us.
Yeah, and then you can also find my TTRPG supplements on itch at Violet-Floor. That's VIOLET-FLOHR.
And for this week's Heroes Call to Action, I decided to emphasize that there are many a women's shelter, chances are one in your area, that I definitely encourage you donate to. These are the kind of places that help women escape from abusive situations, and I'm sure they could use your help in any way. And as always, you can find me at Faye Riviera on all the socials, and you can follow this show on both Twitter and Blue Sky at IER Podcast. If you'd like to help us reach the next chapter of our story monetarily, please consider donating to our Patreon, our Ko-Fi, or the Support the Show link below. Or if you'd like to help us reach the next chapter of our story just by being a good fan, please consider rating us and reviewing us on the podcatcher of your choice and spreading the word to anyone you think might be interested in our mild roast of this dark academia fairy tale. Again, Laura Pohl, if you happen to be listening, please do not take anything we say personally. Anyway, I do hope to get our final Pride Month episode done before the week is out. And actually, our final Pride Month episode is a wish episode by our very own Ellie McConaughey. So, Ellie, the question must be, what is your next wish?
You know, I was thinking about it, and there are lots of things that I could make you cover of varying degrees of insanity. But I think the best thing for us to cover right now was I'm going to finally force you to cover an anime on this show.
Ooh, okay.
We are going to be covering the 2022 anime Mobile Suit Gundam The Witch from Mercury, which is a loose adaptation of Shakespeare's The Tempest.
Interesting. Man, what is with The Tempest in Space? Oh, it's the colonial vibes and the strange new world vibes. Never mind. That was a stupid question.
But Ellie,
okay.
Why would you want us to cover that for Pride Month? Because it's gay.
Okay, but hey, you know what? I'm relatively new to anime, but this should be a good, fun time.
And the future you decide the way you want to try, wherever you choose to stay or to go, together we'll be there.
Ellie, what the fuck? And so our heroines were able to band together and defeat the murderer. But the curse was still ongoing. Will they be able to break the curse before they lose another one of their own? Is anyone else in their class fated to die in a tragically fairy tale-esque way? Will we ever find out on this podcast? Maybe. I'm telling you guys, I don't know if I can take another one of these, but I guess we'll just have to see.